Chris from Mammoth Interactive here. In this intro video, we're going to be learning how to set up our app in Xcode, which means we're going to create a new project. We're going to learn how to navigate around a bit in Xcode. We're also going to take a look at putting some basic data into our app and displaying it in the simulator. So without further ado, let's get started. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to open up my Xcode. And from here, you can actually just hit create a new Xcode project. If you don't have any files on the right, it's probably because you've never used Xcode before, you don't have anything saved. But we're going to create a new project here. You could go to the playground if you just kind of like it says, explore new ideas quickly and easily. But for us, we know we want to make a Apple Watch app. So let's create a new Xcode project. Just clicked on that. And here, it might default to something else, but for us, we're going to make sure we're choosing WatchOS for the project template. And we're going to make an iOS app with the WatchKit app. So if you're using, for example, if you're wanting to develop for an iPad or an iPhone, you'd select iOS. And there it has a whole bunch of other templates available to you. macOS, of course, you can basically make any program you want. So they have tons of more stuff you could choose. WatchOS, you just basically make an iOS app with the WatchKit extension. Keeping in mind that the watch itself, it has a really small screen, so that's why it's kind of limited in terms of the things we can do with it. So let's choose this. We'll go next. And then you need to give it a product name. And here you can put in your name and identifier if you have those things. So let's give it a name here. So let's call it My First Watch App. There we go. Language, make sure that Swift is selected. We're going to be taking a quick look at Swift. And we're going to be using it later on in our app development as well. But make sure Swift is selected. The other option is Objective-C. Swift is kind of built on top of Objective-C. So that's why if you've used Objective-C before, Swift might look a little bit familiar to you. If that's not the case, no worries. This course is going to intro you to Swift as well. Otherwise, devices, make sure that Universal is selected. We don't really want to specify specifically here. We're just going to make sure that Universal Devices is selected. Now you'll notice it defaults to having notifications seen checked off, and Apple actually recommends leaving that. So Apple says, well, maybe you don't plan to have notifications initially, but you do want to have it later on. It's going to be easier just to check this off initially, and then if you don't use it, you don't use it. And for that reason, I'm also going to tick off include complication. Now complication, it's actually a watchmaking term, and a complication is basically something on the watch face that communicates info. So in the context of a smartwatch, that can be pretty much anything that displays important info. So for that reason, I'm going to make sure I have it selected. We may use it, we may not, but again, it's going to be available to us. It's going to be easier if we decide to do so later on. Okay, so carrying on, I'm going to click next. It's going to ask where I want to save the file, and I'm just going to save where I have all my other stuff. And let's click create. And then it's going to take us into the root here of our project folder. You can see My First Watch App. We're in the root essentially. So it shows us the name, bundle identifier. Make sure you don't change this, because this, if you're ever wanting to like deploy to the App Store, your bundle identifier is going to be pretty important to be accurate. Otherwise, if you ever wanted to come back in and change some stuff, so you maybe want to target a different device other than all devices, you could do that. But generally, don't really come here and edit this stuff too often. Other things you're going to notice on the left, there's kind of a file tree system. You can navigate around to different files. On the right, there's kind of a info panel as well. So if you hover over what these are, it tells you what it is. So for example, this is the file inspector. It tells you details about whatever file you have selected. You can also click here if you want to search through the documentation with the quick help. So for example, if you're looking at, for example, some Swift file, so let's just open up app.delegate.swift, for example. And if this looks like random code to you, we'll come back to this and we'll kind of explore it later on. But just to show you the file inspector, it's just showing you details about the file. And this is kind of contextual as well, so this will change as you navigate around. So for example, if you're looking at a .storyboard file, you'll have a lot more options. So just to show you that, so main.storyboard. And if you're looking at what it is, so you might notice this kind of looks like an iPhone screen. Well, there's a reason for that, and we're going to kind of exploring this later, but just to show you, now there's more options up here. So this is where you could do things like adjust height or class or whatever it may be. So that's the file inspector up here. There's also like identity inspector, this thing that kind of looks like an arrow, attribute selector. This one is for size. And again, we'll do a lot more on that later. Other things to note here. So if I go back to the project folder, you can kind of hide or show the navigation panels, whatever you need. And so this is like the console down here. And it's going to be pretty important to manage your space effectively here because it can get kind of crowded once you have many things going on. Another useful feature to know is that up here, these kind of concentric rings, this is the assistant editor. So if you click on this, you can have kind of multiple things going on at once. So for example, maybe on the left, you have your storyboard file, like so. And then on the right, it's going to show you, actually you can get rid of this thing on the side too. Then on the right, it's going to show you the actual code. So if you want to kind of have one thing in mind over here and then you're coding over here, it's going to be necessary for us to use the assistant editor. But let's just go back to the initial view here. So let's kind of take a look at our Watch app itself. So we can look at the My First App, WatchKit app down here, and that's going to be the inside of our app essentially. So if you look at interface.storyboard and you look what it looks like, so it kind of looks like an iOS app or a WatchOS app. And from here we can kind of see, so it gives us a couple views. So there's a dynamic interface as well as notification stuff, but the basically main entry point is here, and it actually tells us with this little arrow showing us the main entry point for our app. So in the interface controller, this is what our app will display initially. And then from here, we can kind of take it however we see fit from here. So if I just kind of collapse the left, this panel here, click that here, you can change the view if you like as well. So right now down here, view as Apple Watch 38mm. You could edit it to choose a different version, for example, 42mm. So let's go ahead and do that. And basically it's all about kind of exploring Xcode. You're not going to break anything if you kind of click around and try it out. So that's the approach I like to take when I'm learning a new IDE, a new development environment. Just kind of click around, see what does what. But let's see if we say, for example, just wanted to put a simple label on our app. That's all we want to do initially is just kind of figure out how to put a label on it. So how can we do that? Well, it's actually quite easy. In Xcode, it makes it easy because it has tons of libraries in here that are available to us that basically do pretty much everything you ever want to do in an app. And the way we can do that is let's just collapse this thing on the right as well, or on the left rather. So as you can see on the right, on this panel over here, that's called, the utilities. Yeah, so the utilities panel, there's a couple different things going on here. And the thing I want to draw your attention to is the thing in the bottom right down here. So it's showing us the objects library. And if you've used iOS before, these things will look pretty familiar to you. So this is how you can bring in basically objects into your app and give them specific behavior that you want. So let's do that. And it's kind of hard to see down here, but down here there's a filter that you can just basically type what you're looking for. So if, for example, we did want to put a label, let's do that. So L-A-B-E-L. Okay, and it kind of goes through and it searches, hey, I found these things that could possibly be labels. And what you need to do, well, you can actually just grab it. So I'm just holding down the left click on the mouse and I'm just going to drag and drop it. So drag and drop into the OS, the WatchOS app over here. And hey, now I have a label on my app here. So that's pretty neat. What can we do with this? Well, we can do all kinds of neat stuff. But first of all, let's figure out how we can actually see this as if it were a real WatchOS app. So to do that, I'm going to run the simulator. And that's another neat feature is that we can use a simulator to simulate, obviously, the WatchOS. So to do that, up on the top left, you see there's kind of a play button. And this will basically compile our code, and then it'll open it up in the simulator so that we can see what it looks like. So let's go ahead and do that. And let's just see what happens. So I'm going to click this. It's building. Okay, it might take a little bit longer the first time because it has to build up the code. but it usually tells you build succeeded, or it'll tell you build failed. Again, you're not going to break anything if it fails. You'll just have to go in and fix your code. And it's pretty good at telling you what's broken. So down here, the simulator, it looks like a blueprint with a little phone next to it. So if we go to it here, so right now it looks like an iPhone 7 Plus. Let's find the watch in here. Okay, it looks like it didn't find the watch simulator. So let's just make sure up here. Yeah, so we're going to make sure we want the, we select the WatchKit app. So yeah, let's say iPhone 7 Plus with the Apple Watch series. Let's just try that out. So now let's try it again. So we'll run our simulator. And let's see here. Okay, so this is the iPhone 7 Plus. And then over here, this is the watch simulator. So it's just kind of loading right now. And once it loads, we should see that the label just displays as a label. And this can take a little time sometimes, so it's good to kind of just be patient and let it do its thing. So this is the initial load, and it's just showing us kind of the default watch look. And then it kind of takes a second, but it's loading in our app in the simulator. And there we go. So if I just minimize this, so it opens up an iPhone 7 because you can kind of pair your iPhone with your watch. But we're not going to worry about that for now. For now, we're just really concerned with the watch simulator. So this is it. So right now it's just showing us what the time is currently, as well as whatever label we have. So from here, we can actually kind of adjust our code and then rerun the simulator, and it's going to kind of show us what it's doing. So if I just kind of leave this in the background, there's no issue with that. But then when you try to run it again, it's going to say, hey, you have a simulator running. Do you want to stop that process and start a new one? At which point we're going to say yes. So for now, I'm just going to kind of minimize this and just keep it there. It's not hurting anything. And then from here, we can kind of play with our label behavior. Let's look at changing the appearance of our label using some built-in features of Xcode. And Xcode actually makes it pretty easy to change appearance and size and all kinds of features about our object. The first thing I'm going to do though is I'm going to get rid of this console and the output fields down here. Console just kind of opens up automatically whenever you run the simulator, just in case you're logging anything to the console, for example. So you can shrink that. You can just use this little down arrow button and it kind of shrinks that down below. And also, we're not really worrying too much right now about our static and our notification interfaces down here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to kind of keep those out of sight. And I just zoomed in 200% to our watch interface here. And from here, we can do all kinds of neat things. So if I click on label, for example, and I go to the attributes selector, well, now you can see there's all these different attributes that are available to us that we can kind of edit. And this is how we're going to be adjusting the, say, behavior and look of our label button. So let's say the first thing I wanted to do was I wanted to change the text inside the label. Now there's a couple ways I could do that. I could kind of double click here and just rewrite it. So say hello world. Okay, and then I hit enter. And it automatically adjusts. You notice it kind of pushed it out even more to the right so that it didn't overflow the edge. So that's one way. The other way, of course, is you can come in here in the text field and you can just kind of write hello world or whatever you need to write. So hi world, right? Hit return and it'll update here automatically. So that's pretty nice. As you can see, there's a whole bunch of options available to us. So if you wanted to change the font, for example, or the color, I think white looks pretty good. So I'm not going to change the color, but what if I did want to change the font? So you can actually just kind of select this T here. And you can select, well, do you want to use a system font, for example? So that would be things like thin, light, bold, for example. You want to say heavy font, like so. That looks pretty cool. But what if you wanted italic instead? So you just kind of play with these and use whatever font you like. Let's go back to how it was, though. Let's see here. So I don't want a system font. I just want, oh, I don't know, textile for body. Yeah, that looks fine. And then we select this again. So other things we might want to do, well, I'm not too happy with it being aligned left. So what if instead of that I wanted to align it to the center or to the right, for example? Now you might think you would just be able to grab it and move it around like that. But if I try that, so I'm holding down the click button, for some reason it disappears, and when I let go it just kind of reverts back to where it was. And the way this is done, you just have to make sure that you select the right field in your inspector here. And you can see there's a section here for alignment. Well, there we go. So right now you can see horizontally, right? Horizontally it's aligned left. The other options, center or right. So hey, there we go. So now it's centered. Not too much to that one really. And you can also say vertical as well. So if you want to center it in the absolute middle, right? So now it's centered in the middle, or you could also say at the bottom as well. So other things we could do, well, we could adjust the size as well. And it's going to be pretty crucial because considering the watch face is pretty small, we're going to have to take considerations with our size. So let's see what happens if we adjust this. So let's say make the size relative to the container, and then it allows us to edit that. So right now it's size 1, which is just kind of the default standard normal size. So let's see what happens if we adjust this width. So if I make it smaller, you can see that it's kind of shrinking now. So shrink, shrink, shrink. Eventually it kind of truncates it, and then it just makes it kind of a dot, dot, dot. We can adjust that as well, but for now, let's just kind of do this. So we'll make it a little bit smaller. We'll say 0.8, and then we will also adjust the height, and we'll do the same thing. So defaults to 1, we can kind of make it as small as we see fit. So now relative to its container, which is just basically the entire interface, it is kind of altering the size. But now our text is kind of centered left, not centered, but aligned left. And we can fix that if we just kind of play with the alignment up here. So we can align that within the center, and there we go. So it's not too different from, say, editing something in another text editor, for example. It's pretty user-friendly, and you can just kind of play around with this and see what it does. For now, let's run this in our simulator and see if we broke anything. Shouldn't be, but let's see what happens. So if I click this, it's going to say, hey, you already have an instance of that running, so let's stop that. And it's going to terminate those, and it's going to rerun the simulator. Okay, so it went ahead and opened it up again. And where's our watch? Here's our watch. Okay, and it opened up the console down here, and oh, there it is. Okay, so there we go. So I'm going to shrink this guy down. And so that's what our watch interface looks like right now. Not too bad. So let's play around with it some more. So we'll go back. I'm going to shrink this down, get rid of the console, and let's see what other fun things we can do with our labels. Now let's see how else we can adjust our label in terms of appearance. So if I click on it here, let's say I wanted to put a multi-line string here. So instead of a single line, I wanted to put a multi-line string. And it's not as straightforward as you might think. So normally you might expect, hey, just make this 2 lines, and then I should be able to just hit, shift enter or shift return, and that should make a new line. But unfortunately, it doesn't seem to work that way. So one kind of workaround for this is you can see I've already adjusted lines to 2. And you can actually just paste in something that's already several lines long. So for example, 2 lines long, and it'll understand to make it 2 lines. So let's just observe that. So if I make this 1 line again, and before I do that, I'm just going to reset my size and so my width and height to be sized to fit content. Otherwise, it's not going to show up properly because we've already resized it manually. So what I can do is I can actually just kind of paste in a multi-line string. So let me do that. So I'm just going to clear this in. Paste in a multi-line string. There we go. Okay, so you notice it only shows hello. And the reason is I just have to set the lines here to 2 so that it understands that I want it to display 2 lines. You could also say 0, and then it's just going to always add as many lines of text as you need. But I'm just going to hard code it to 2 because for now I'm only going to require 2 lines. I can always adjust this later if I ever need to. And you'll see the reason I readjusted the size here, well, let's tinker with this again and let's see what happens. You know what, I'm just going to adjust the height. So if I kind of tinker with this, if I were to make it too small, you can see it would start to cut stuff off. So that's why I reset it, just to be, just size it, to fit the content. That way it's just going to make sure that it's sized appropriately for whatever content is inside. Now let's say I wanted to make this bigger. I'm not happy with it being so small, keeping in mind this is going to be a watch face. So we're zoomed in quite a bit, and if we want this to be legible, it's probably going to need to be a bit bigger, and we've actually already seen how to do that. So if we check it out here in font, so right now it's set to body, so we can't really adjust the font size, but if we switch to a system font, then we can change. Let's say I want it to be heavy again, and I want to make it bigger. You know what, that's a bit too heavy. Let's make it semi-bold. Yeah, that looks okay. So let's make it a bit bigger here. Okay, so that looks okay at this point. Yeah, so size 40, that's a pretty good size. Let's test this out in the simulator, see what it looks like. So we'll run it. Okay, so that'll reset, and we'll open up our watch app. And this should load in a second here. It takes a little while sometimes. All right, there we go. And there we have it. The next feature I want to talk about is this min scale feature. And so to show that off, what I'm going to do is I'm going to bring in another label here. There's a couple ways I can do that. First of all, let me adjust the positioning on this label. So let's move it up to the top instead of being directly centered vertically. So go up, and then let's adjust the size a little bit. So we'll make it a little bit smaller. Okay, there we go. So a couple ways I can bring in a new label. One way is that I could just kind of copy whatever's in this one and create it in a new label. And to do that, it's actually very easy. So I can hold down the Alt key on the keyboard, click, and just drag it. And whoops. So let me try that again here. Click, drag. So that basically creates a duplicate label, which is great if you want to use the same text. If not, so I just erase that. And you can actually just put in another label the way I did before. So I'm going to grab it down here. You can see I still have it typed in as my filter. So grab it, pull it in here, and just drop it wherever you need, and just kind of automatically puts it down below. So let's change the text of this label here. So I'm going to put in something like this. My name is Chris. Okay, and I'm going to put a couple exclamation points, a couple more. There we go. So that's what I wanted. So now you can see once your string gets too long, it starts to truncate it. So instead of showing the full amount, it just kind of chooses a point to truncate, and then it says ... instead. And we can use min scale to actually adjust the scale of the font. And so this basically allows us to scale the font to accommodate whatever text value is in here. Now this might not seem that useful at first glance if you're in control of the label, but what if the user does something to change the text of the label? So you have, say, a dynamic label, the user does something to change the text, and you want to be able to scale this so that it displays properly. You can actually just adjust the minimum scale. So it doesn't go up, so 1 is the highest, but it can go down. So for example, if we scale it down to 0.5, you see the text will basically automatically scale to fit inside. Right? So you can even bring it down even more. It doesn't need to scale more though, so it just basically scales to whatever it needs to scale to. You can put in 0 also, which will just default to 0.8 behind the scenes. So this is going to be useful for us later on if we are adjusting the label data. So right, what happens if I put in more exclamation points? You can see it shrinks it down however much it needs to. Right, so that's going to be useful for us to know. And the reason I created a new label for that is that it seems to only work when the label is one line. So if I try to do this over here, I'm not sure that it'll work. So let's see though. Okay, so it truncated it, but let's try to do our minimum scaling here. Yeah, so it doesn't seem to work on multi-line strings. So let me undo that. Okay, undo all of that. Get rid of those exclamation points. Okay, so now that we know what min scale does, let's just put it to, yeah, let's see. Yeah, you might have to start adjusting the scale as well. So even though it's at 0.8, it's still not scaled down enough to fit everything we want. So you're going to have to sometimes tinker with this to get the behavior and the styles you want. let's edit this some more. So I'm going to get rid of all these exclamation points because personally I don't really want them. And so we will basically allow it to scale if it needs to. We can adjust this like we did before as well. So let's adjust the spacing. So let's see here, alignment, let's say center, vertical, we'll put it at, say, the bottom. And there we go, pretty neat. Let's see what happens if we start to add a whole bunch of labels, so much so that it doesn't fit anymore. So let's just see what happens. So we'll add a label here, and you can see you can't really add them next to each other. So it doesn't really allow that. But let's do another one here, and uh-oh, we're getting close to the bottom. And you might think, weird, so it's stretching out the watch. That doesn't seem like it would be good. So let's just see what happens if you do have a display that's too long. And you can probably imagine what will happen, but let's just run it anyway and see what it does. Let's go to our simulator, wait for this to load, and let's observe what it does. So this will take a second. Okay, there it goes. And you can see that it just made it scrollable. So now it just makes it so you can scroll down. So if you're ever seeing this, I wouldn't worry about it too much unless you don't want scrolling, in which case you're going to have to adjust the size of your labels or whatever you're displaying here. So that's what happens when it stretches out. So it's kind of odd behavior, in my opinion, in the storyboard, in that it doesn't just add a scroll bar, but it'll just make it scroll if it gets too long here. Okay, so for now though, I'm just going to take those out. So we'll just delete all of these. Delete, 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 delete. We'll keep that one, but we will delete that one. Next attribute I wanted to discuss is the alpha channel. So alpha channel, if you're not aware of what it does, it basically controls the opacity of an object. So 1 is purely opaque, you can't see through it. And if you just select your label, you can kind of play with it here. So if we bring it down, you'll notice that it's becoming more and more transparent as we go down. So this is what you're going to use if you want to control the opacity. Of course, you just kind of play around with the alpha channel. The next thing I wanted to discuss is how to add a label and create the text programmatically. So it's nice to be able to use this labeler over here. So it's nice to be able to use it, but we want to be able to know how to do this programmatically, because later on we're going to want to be able to do that. So say we add a button and the user can click on the button, and we want to maybe change some label text, for example. And to do that, we're going to need to know how to do it behind the scenes programmatically. So of course, in order to do that, we're going to need to understand a little bit of Swift in order to be able to understand what we're doing. So let's just, before we do anything else, let's just take a look at some of the Swift code here of this interface. So let's go ahead and we will bring out our navigation panel, and we're going to look at some interface controller.swift code. So you notice this is our interface.storyboard. And if you're coming from a different language, so a programming background, you're going to understand what this means, so to be a controller. Essentially, this controls the view that we see on any given page. So we have our interface storyboard, and our interface controller controls what we see on this view. So if we take a look at our interface controller.swift, and let me get rid of the extraneous stuff on the left and the right. So just to kind of show you what it looks like. So this is what Swift looks like. If you're coming from an Objective-C background, this is going to be, of course, very familiar to you. If not, just to kind of quickly go over some of what this stuff is doing currently. Currently, it's not really doing much of anything. So we have some code laid out and some comments to kind of direct us on what goes where. But basically, this is a class. So it's an object with the class interface controller, and it has a type here. The thing to know about Swift is that it's strongly type-oriented. And that means most things you're going to want to declare the specific type of thing that it is. In this case, for example, our interface controller, it's a type of WK interface controller, which WK stands for WatchKit. So what this does is allow us to set the behavior, and we can kind of define our own functions and methods as well if we ever need to. You'll notice these are all functions. So function awake, function will activate, function did deactivate. Now you'll notice that it has some override functions here. So override function awake. Now why is that? Well, it's basically inheriting these methods from WK interface controller, and we can give specific instructions here, or we can rewrite some default behavior if we want to. And as you notice here in the comments that are kind of guiding us, it tells us, hey, you can configure interface objects here. And so what this does is once the app awakes, we can do something. Otherwise, we can do something when will activate is called. So will activate, as it says here in the comment, this method is called when watch view controller is about to be visible to the user. So if we want to do something right before the app activates and is visible to the user, this is where you would do it. Same with did deactivate. So this is kind of the opposite. So this method is called when the watch view controller is no longer visible. Now, there's a lot more that could be said about Swift, of course. We can get really, really deep into it. But for this lesson, we just want to learn how to basically connect our interface to our controller and how we can use that to kind of set our text. So that's all we want to do initially. We just want to create a label. We want to set the text programmatically. So let's take a look again. We'll open up our navigation here. We'll go to our interface.storyboard. And so basically, we want to be able to connect something here to the code. And Xcode actually makes that very easy to do. So if I kind of bring up this assistant editor, so again, I'm going to go to these concentric rings up here. And so we bring that up. This is showing us the code here. And this kind of shows the benefit of having Xcode show us this side by side along with the storyboard. So we can actually just directly connect stuff in this way. Now, I did want to mention also there's absolutely nothing wrong with the way we did it initially. So, you can use this, this selector to kind of add objects here. So let's go ahead and do that actually. So we'll go ahead and we'll pull in a label. And that's totally fine. Nothing wrong with that. But we want to kind of dive a little bit deeper to understand what's happening behind the hood, or under the hood rather. So behind the scenes, what's happening. So from here, let's figure out how we can change what this label contains. So what the label text is.